Hello.
I'm just anticipating the presentation.
He's the one who should be
We'll
yawning.
try and line it up.
He's the one who should be yawning, not you.
Is, Mr.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for attending. Tonight, we are embarking upon our 2023-2024 budget season with the Stratford Public Schools. My name is Amy Wiltsey, Finance Committee Chair, and I would like to thank administrators, community members, Board of Ed members, and our Finance Committee members for taking the opportunity to attend what is likely to be the most important meeting of our year. And thank you to all of those who are streaming and watching us live. The only thing on our agenda tonight is Dr. Sunday's presentation, so the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, and thank you, Mrs. Wiltsey, and thank you to our board members and our finance committee members who are here with us today. Thank you to our family and our colleagues who are watching from home. It's hard to believe that, a whole calendar year has gone by and a lot has happened in that calendar year. It feels like Groundhog's Day in some way. But this is a particularly busy time of the year for us because this is a very important task that we engage in. I would like to express my gratitude in advance for the Finance Committee. The next 3.5 months will really consume a great deal of your time. Full transparency, the budget process for us here at the district office is a full year project, but we began to dive deeper into this work in November. So in all, it takes up almost about 6 months of our academic year. I am happy to present this proposal to the Finance Committee with the intention and hopes that it will follow with a full recommendation to the Board of Education. Again, my appreciation to the committee in advance for the time you will commit to the stakeholders of the Stratford Public Schools and the community at large. I'm going to ask Mr. Rivers to assist in advancing the slides. If you can, please, Mr. Rivers, the next slide. This is just a quick roadmap of this evening's presentation, okay? What I would like to do is also provide some level of historical context. If you remember at this time last year when I stood behind this podium, I made a presentation to the Finance Committee with a request of a 4.6% increase, or approximately $5.5 million year over year in the previous year. Ultimately, this committee made a recommendation to the board which was adopted at 4.5%, which was subsequently advanced to the town council. This is just a roadmap. I have about 28 slides. What we're hoping to accomplish today is go through our process, certainly put down the proposal for this committee's consideration, and then maybe field a few questions to close the presentation, perhaps. Okay? Next slide, please. People who are involved in this process, again, the Board of Education, our colleagues in the Finance Committee, District Administration. I do want to take a moment to express gratitude and appreciation. I did mention that all in all, this work will consume about 5 consecutive months of my administrative team's time, but a lot of those hours are poured into by Pamela Mangini. If you can, please put your hands together for Pamela Mangini. And Susan Nicholson, who is our finance director. Over the last couple of weeks, I spent a lot of time on Google Meet calls or on the phone with Pam as well as Susan, and we feel extremely good about the work we are going to present today. I'm confident we designed a process here that we refined this year, but it's a process that is centered on transparency and advocacy. My chief role as the superintendent of schools is to stand in front of this committee, stand in front of the Board of Education, stand in front of our families, and advocate, match with plans to make sure we provide the best educational experience for our children. All of that work cannot be done in a silo. If you can, please go to the next slide. We lean heavily on our principals to do the work at the local level, or quote unquote the building level. So please, if you can, put your hands together for the school leaders. Just want to confirm I'm still audible. Okay, very good. If you can, advance to the next slide. Before we get into the actual budget, I think it's important that we take a moment to try to capture just a small snippet of the things that we do that's transformational here. I think it's undebatable that we have improved some things across our district with the knowledge that there's a lot left to do. If we were to name or list every highlight, we would have probably a dozen more slides. This is a small snippet of some of the recognitions as it touches on the various stakeholders of our district, okay? Most recently, Bunnell High School received an award by the College Board. I believe it was Lou's class, correct? Please put your hands together for me. Our Board of Education received, probably for the first time in how many years?
Since 2015, so about 8 years.
In about 8 years of recognition from CADE, the Connecticut Association for Boards of Education. Please put your hands together for that. It's important to note that that recognition doesn't come without the work. The recognition are evaluated against a strict set of criteria that are scaled and evaluated and anchored in research for effective boards of education. Super proud. Earlier this, in the first semester, we received some good news. We're obviously going to continue to look to create opportunities for our kids to get attention from the Ivy League schools and ultra-selective schools. But at Stratford High, we have at least 2 at this point in time who received notifications for acceptances to both Harvard and Brown. Okay, so please round of applause. We have students who are receiving athletic recognitions from the conference and from the state. We have our kids who also engage in the performing arts who are receiving various recognitions. We also had point of pride for our district, and we're going to obviously look to scale this out even more. Right here in Stratford, we hold the reigning Assistant Principal of the Year in the state of Connecticut. And that person is Miss Arlette Johnson at Franklin Elementary. Obviously, Jim Miller, who is an educator who's been with us for quite some time. The man has really moved the level of his work from teaching and developing students to something that is legacy worthy when you think about his almost 4 decades of his service to the Stratford Public Schools. I do have the strategic plan up there because this is a point of pride, it's a point of highlight for us. So many people who are in this room participated in that, but what is a point of highlight is the notion or the idea that so many other people who are not in this room had a voice in setting the direction for the district. That instrument right there will be a guiding platform for a lot of the budget conversations that we have over the next 3.5 months. Looking at this is just one publication, the Niche Report. You'll see it's a point of pride for me particularly to see that we are ranked number 4, the number 4 most diverse school district in the state of Connecticut. It's our belief that there's a tremendous amount of assets that come with the diversity that exists here, and I think it's well noted and it's well discussed that we have over 49 languages that we speak in our schools. Okay. Another indicator here, 46 best district for athletes. It's my opinion that we have some amazing sports. I think we can make that number be somewhere in the 20s, okay, over time. Okay, more work to be done there. This is a point of emphasis, okay, that I think needs to be at the front of our discussions, right? And I think you'll see that this here will, that plan will be responsive to some of these things here. Right, we like some of these numbers. We're always going to push the threshold in this regard. But this number right here, to me, after 2 years of being in this district, does not accurately reflect the quality of the teachers that stand in our classrooms every day or the potential or talent of the children who sit in our classrooms all day. If you look at this, it essentially says we're roughly in the 30th percentile. In my opinion, we have the ability to flip that and be in the 50th percentile, but it will take time. It will take a commitment. It will take everybody driving in the same direction. Okay? I want to close with this. Most recently, the State Department of Education bestow the recognition on Eli Whitney Elementary School. That's the School of Distinction. Please put your hands together for Eli. And this is a plug to our people at Eli, and congratulations to Tori Floyd. There's no better way to enter retirement than with this recognition. But the School of Distinction recognition is given to schools in the top 10% of the state for their performance and or growth as measured by the Connecticut Next Generation Accountability System, okay? The School of Distinction for high growth in math for all students and high growth in math for students with high needs. This happened at Eli Whitney during the height or the peak of the pandemic, okay? I think that deserves a round of applause for the work that the professional community actually did. The next level of our work is to make sure that whatever magic is happening in Eli, we can replicate across our other schools as well. So, Mr. Rivers, next slide, please. So why are we doing this work, okay? Last spring, we convened a committee of people to work on the strategic operating plan, and part of that work was noting what would be the vision or where do we want to take the district over the next couple of years. As you know, in 2019, we began the process of formulating the DNA structure of what we felt was important for every child who comes through our schools to have upon graduation. I'm going to give you a quick moment to read that vision, because what we do over the next 3.5 months has to feed directly into ensuring that all of our children, upon graduation from either Bunnell High School or Stratford High School, are proficient around those competencies or attributes. What I really appreciate about this slide and about the consensus of adopting this as our vision is that although this is an aspirational destination, right? This is the arrival point, that's what a vision is. What we've done over the last couple of months is we've been very intentional to make sure that there's alignment around what the vision says, as well as what the mission is intended to do on a daily basis, in order to make sure that this vision materializes over time for our children. Mr. Rivers, if you can, please go to the next slide. I'd like to ask you to take a quick moment to look at those beautiful faces of our kiddos and read that mission statement. This is a much condensed mission statement, and for those of you who participated in the SOP development process, there was vigorous debate. Every word was unpacked and analyzed. There is no clear demonstration of inclusive voice in what we're trying to do. But the crux of this is our job every day is to support the growth of the whole student through a challenging and inspiring education within a safe space and inclusive environment. The charge for everybody who has any kind of association, interest, or affiliation with our academic institution is to ask themselves, what does this mean for my role? What does this statement mean for my role? And how does this play out in what I do on a daily basis? Out of this vision and out of this mission, we generated 5 priorities for the district. Mr. Rivers, if you can go to the next slide. These are multi-year priorities. I'll give you a quick moment to take a look at those priorities. As we go through this budget process, we will make explicit ties to one or multiple of those domains of those board priorities that you see there. Also, the directive that has been given to all of our school leaders and all of our professional communities is that to the extent possible, all of their school improvement goals and all of the school improvement plans must be aligned to multiple components of that. For that, or to that end, we reduced the level of variation across the district of successful things happening in one space and perhaps some challenges in other spaces. So I'm particularly excited about this next slide. Very simple question. And I have to be very honest, I didn't plagiarize, I'm gonna give credit, but I stole that slide from Principal Hicks at Second Hill Lane, okay? I think it's a powerful statement. We've been seeing this over the last couple of, certainly over the last year and a half. As I entered the district, which seems like a long time ago, I hosted a few town hall meetings, and one of the things that I heard from our families and our staff who attended was this idea of, sometimes it feels like we are two different communities all in the same space. So the question was, how do we come together? As I said, I stole Dan's idea, but his mantra at Second Hill Lane is one team. It's one team. I don't think that anyone will debate that we have grown. I know there's still a lot more work in front of us, nor will they debate that we have improved as an institution over the last couple of years, but there's certainly more to do, okay? And I believe that this notion of one community, it has to be the propane that fuels the vehicle to move us in the right direction. So who are we, Mr. Rivers? Next slide, please. I do have to give myself credit. Over the last 2 weeks, I've been working on this slide, and my Excel to bar graph and pie chart skills, right? You're gonna see on full display here. But I do have to give credit again to our data people who were able to furnish me with the data. So over the last 5 years, our enrollment data, and this is just for our in-district kiddos, has remained relatively flat, by and large, ranging anywhere between 6,600 and approximately 6,800 for our in-district kiddos. What I will show you now in the successive slides is, although it's remained flat, within each of these bar graphs has been happening a metamorphosis, okay? There's been a metamorphosis that has been occurring within each bar graph. So remember, enrollment numbers don't change widely, but there is a metamorphosis that has occurred over the last couple of years. Mr. Rivers, please go to the next slide. Just give you a quick moment to take a look at this chart. And again, for board members, this is the data that you see in the pony every week on that last page. Okay, this is just a 5-year trend. So, just to give you the legend, our students with exceptionalities are in blue, our second language learners in maroon, yellow, or green, based on whether or not you're colorblind, is our students of color, male and our females. By and large, our numbers for our males and our females don't change. It's been roughly 48 to 52%, okay? What is important to note is this to this, right? What's important to note is this to this. What's important to note is that this has been pretty stable, but once this number is disaggregated by site, it looks different, right? Mr. Rivers, if you can't go back to the previous slide. Metamorphosis, that's happening here. So with that, it invites new programming, okay, as we continue to learn about their learning styles, their learning needs. It invites new learning for us as professionals in order to be responsive to their learning needs. It invites resources that has to be a point of discussion for this committee and ultimately the board, and ultimately when we move our ask to the town. Go back to the stay right here. Just give you another couple of moments to take a look and make notes if you choose. There are some images that show up here, okay? Cornell High School held its second cultural showcase.
Yes.
Dr. Graff?
Yes.
And it was, for those of you who were able to attend, it was a powerful demonstration of community. We talk about include, engage, inspire. To me, that was a clear illustration of that, where you were able to find kids who were finding ways to connect to their heritage in a space that it was welcomed and supported and celebrated. That's just one example, but it certainly happens across all of our schools at the middle school level as well as the elementary school level. Stratford High School is one of the most diverse spaces as well. Is this Flag football?
That's a student faculty flag football game.
You didn't have any workman's comp cases on that,
Not
right?
this year.
But that's what community looks like, okay? That is exactly what community looks like. So, the one data point that is probably not reflected here is the free and reduced lunch, okay? And that number is somewhere between 46 and 48% for our district, right? Am I close on that?
Yes.
So when we talk about the budget and what we need to do, all these variables have to enter the discussion, okay? All of these variables have to enter the discussion, and we're looking forward to having those conversations over the next 3.5 months. Now we're gonna flip it and go to the next slide. I know this visual is pretty hard to see, okay? This was not my best work, all right? I was giving myself some pats in the back. Couldn't figure this out. I probably spent 45 minutes on this slide, okay? But essentially what this is our faculty and staff demographic, okay? Our racial demographic of our faculty and staff. It's no secret, the ratio of distribution across the state of Connecticut is essentially 9-to-1, okay? It's 90% of faculty and staff across the state of Connecticut are white, and the rest are broken down around these subgroups. What is important to note, even though these visuals are microscopic, okay, is you're seeing a trend here that's moving in this direction for people of color, specifically in Stratford, okay? You're seeing a trend here that's moving in this direction for our white professional staff. Now, make no mistakes, we're not just, kicking our white professional staff out the front door. We have some amazing people here. We will celebrate that. But in opportunities where we do have vacancies, I think, the board started this work a few years ago with the minority teacher recruitment plan. We've tried to put a little bit of propane into that, particularly with this great resignation. It gives us opportunities to hire. But what you'll find is over the last couple of years, we have made a dent, okay, by about 2.3%. I know you can't see it, but these numbers are accurate, okay? By about 2.3%. What is the story behind this now becomes the 2.3% that's being realized by the Stratford Public Schools, and there's still a lot more work to do, okay? Far outpaces the state's pace with this work, okay? The state made it then at 0.7%, so computationally, Stratford is moving at almost 3 times the speed as the state. So what does that mean? It means when a child enrolls in our school system, they're more likely to be in a classroom with a racially diverse teacher compared to the state. Just surface level data. You can disaggregate however you choose, okay? But it's important because if you go back to the previous slide, we went from here to here, right? So that's a pretty important storytelling measure. So some good work to do there. We are having conversations. I know as a board we have spent a good amount of time having offline conversations about retention, particularly when we see what's happening across the country, what's happening across the state. I'm working with our HR director, Ms. Courtney Brown. She has, in draft form at this time, a strategic plan that we're hoping to present to the board in February or March. That we're hoping will be the foundation for our HR human capital work for the next couple of years. Okay? Okay, next slide. So now let's start to get into the, did we skip one there? Okay. So let's start to get into the budget. Myself and Pam employ a pretty rigorous process where we sit down with every administrator and we go essentially line by line and we have conversations to justify the expenditures, right? And to the extent possible, what we ask them to do, even though it's premature, it's early, we ask them to think about their building goals for next year and construct their side budget against that. So this is a process that I particularly like, and very, very pleased with the work that our principals have done in that regard. Hang tight. it brings us to our ask, okay, of this committee. This time last year, I asked for about 5.5 million in a very lean budget, or 4.6%. We spent an incredible amount of time, myself, Pam, and the team, studying the budget with a commitment to improvement and maintaining resources that we have, particularly people. We're really proud of this work. But again, as the board, we have to be responsive to the needs that our students have. So with that, Mr. Rivers, go to the next slide. I'm going to introduce our ask to this committee for consideration and discussion, and ultimately moving this to the Board of Education. For fiscal year 24, the proposed budget will be $127,993,416, or an approximate increase of 4.8 million, or a 3.9 over the previous year. Mr. Rivers, if you can go to the next slide. This is a little bit of the budget history over the last couple of years. If you go to the next slide as well. This is a familiar slide to the committee. This is simply a breakdown of the budget by object codes. So I'm sure it's pretty intuitive. There's not a lot of flexibility around some of these object codes. Benefits and salaries and compensations are largely fixed. Tuition fixed. There are a couple places where we'll be able to have deeper conversations, but there aren't a tremendous amount of flexibilities. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Major budget drivers. Of course, the increase in this year, again, to compensation for certified and non-certified staff. Next slide. This is just a visual representation of this donut graph. And for committee members, this is in your book. And we'll make this, the budget booklet available to the public in the coming day or two. So 3.9 to us is a historically low ask, okay? I think it's important that we really emphasize that, because I think that should signal to our stakeholder base that we did our due diligence in a way that we were responsive in so many different ways to the concern or the thoughts that we understand and recognize the burden on taxpayers. If you can go to the next slide. I think this visual is actually quite telling as well, so I'm going to give the committee an opportunity to take a glance at the committee, or take a glance at this graphic. Next year, when we have another Groundhog's Day, we'll have a bar graph here that shows the 3.9, and I'm hopeful that the blue column will also show a 3.9. What is noteworthy about this graphic is that the gap between here and here becomes a pain point come May. Okay? The gap between here and here becomes a pain point come May, right? So these conversations early, and again, I'm encouraged with this specific budget. Last year I was new to the district and I was learning about our processes and our ability to fund public education. And we've been having formal and informal conversations with town leaders. The board has made it clear to me as a superintendent what their priorities are as it relates to making sure we educate our students. But I think this specific budget trend is important to note. What's worth celebrating is the next slide. said, a tremendous amount of energy. Big credit to Pam and Jeannie and the team. We scoured through our budget to demonstrate that we want a low ask, and at the same time, keep the ethos of what we have been preaching at the core, which is our investment in our people and our children, okay? I've had conversations with Mike Fiorello in the past, my commitment to making sure we keep the association whole. I've had similar conversations with SAA President Susan Schmidt, and I think this budget proposal to this committee and ultimately to our board is reflective of that. I cannot recall the last time we've made a proposal that did not have reductions. Put that up again. So I think with the low number and this variable here, I think we're hearing our tax base, loud and clear. I'm not saying that, the impact of the public schools will never impact the tax base, but we're trying to reduce the radius blast of that as much as possible and still be positioned to deliver high quality education to our students and support our staff because they've been working incredibly hard. So I'm proud of this work, and we recognize that everybody brings value to the organization or the academic institution that we call the Stratford Public Schools. So this is a number we're going to look to continue to echo over the next couple of weeks. That being said, we do have some opportunities at this board and through the recommendations of this finance committee to make some program improvements. Okay, Mr. Rivers, if you can't go to the next slide. Give you a quick moment to take a look at this. For those who are at home who may not know the data points, we're making a request for an assistant principal at Second Hill Lane, which is our largest elementary school with approximately, I believe, 645 kids. Okay, it's larger than any of our middle schools. Okay, we had to make some changes last year in order to make sure that kids will be adequately serviced. But the number is still quite high, and we believe that this will pay dividends in terms of how we'll have people on the floor to support children, people in the classroom to support teachers. To me, this is an equity-based recommendation or request. Deans at the middle school, by far, our middle schools behaviorally are the most active spaces. This recommendation is intended to provide support for instructional leaders and classroom teachers. And as I envision this, the deans will be overseeing conduct management, prepare referrals in collaboration with the principals, lead data team conversations, which are directly linked to our NCSS initiative, have program management oversight, have event coverage capabilities, and also assist with family engagement. But I also believe that if we're able to get this done for our middle schools, it also gives us the grow your own capabilities for aspiring administrators. The third ask is for parity purposes, okay? It came to our attention last year that Worcester had less 0.5 of a school counselor. And what is ironic in this process, and it didn't really make sense to us, but what is ironic in this process is that Worcester actually has a larger enrollment than Flood. So that's an equity piece. We are reinstituting the nurse, right, as we discussed for the board. I'm sure you remember last October we had deep and broad conversations about this. This position is going to be a district position, much what we did this year after October, but it will be housed at one of our parochial schools with the intention that it will be there 80% of the time. However, if Heather Borges and Kim Velasquez needs to support any one of our schools, we'll be able to pull from that space. Next slide, please. Afternoon and evening monitors for both of our high schools. As everybody here knows, the lion's share of our after-school events oftentimes happen at the school, at the high schools. For so many different reasons and to protect the safety and integrity of our facilities, we believe that there will be value added in having at least one monitor stay to oversee the premises after school. Beyond that, with our commitment to improving the safety infrastructure, in after-school hours, where it's largely unsupervised, there aren't as many people such as teachers, administrators who might be able to see something and say something. We want to be able to position people there. When you think about some of the other events that we have, whether it's a choir performance, a band performance, or a board meeting at Stratford High, oftentimes we park the front door of the cone. That's problematic. Okay, we have to be able to shift from that practice. And this positions us to, at a relatively manageable cost, be responsive to the safety, particularly around events at our schools. Scholarship coordinator stipends. We celebrate this in May. I'm happy that we have our high school principals here, but combined from community scholarships, we received 425 at Bunnell and 405 at Stratford High. Cumulatively, more than $800,000 that went to our seniors, our graduates. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes into it. If you've ever been to the scholarship event at either of the high school, you know it's a point of pride, but it also demonstrates the support. The coordinating work that goes into it takes a lot of time. And right now, to the best of my knowledge, the people who have been leading the work have not been compensated for it. This is it's a $5,000 investment for $830,000 that goes to Stratford children. Smart Pass, this is pretty exciting. This was piloted this year at Flood Middle School with a good deal of success that our secondary principals had a conversation with Principal Rodriguez. This is something we're going to look to scale out. I see a couple of my board members smiling about it. The kids may hate it, but it's a way that our schools are able to, and this has a lot of functionality when we talk about meaningful learning or the overall well-being. If we happen to find a child who has happy feet, that's what I call happy feet, right? You just walk around all day, right? We're able to limit the amount of passes they get. Okay, so this is a strategic way that hedges against recidivism. Not just that, it also assists in conversations because sometimes our families may not get the full story. So for instance, if a child is going to a nurse's office or a counselor's office, or if they're in the hallway, or have you, but they're not actually in class, and the teacher is doing everything they can to support the child around performing and growing within the classroom, but the child is just simply not there. The data that's gleaned from the Smart Pass can serve as a discussion basis with the parent, okay? As we look to solicit their support. So the functionality is big. We're gonna look to implement this at our secondary schools. The tutor positions for math and reading were taken out in the past. We have the ability to put them in this year. The principals made these requests, and I think this is incredibly important because if you flash back to the September board meeting, we presented our achievement and performance data. You remember that? Okay. The pandemic was disruptive in so many different ways, but what we also found is that there was an increase in referrals to special education, which may not necessarily tell the true story of how student learning has been happening. The tutors will help us from an intervention standpoint, which supports our commitment to NTSS. It will help our kids narrow the achievement gap. It will help our children focus on competencies and standards that are relative to those subject areas, and ultimately reduce retention, position kids for better performance on state assessments as well. So this request has my full support. Hang tight, okay? The last two slides is an opportunity for this committee and the board to deliver on the promises of the SOP. It's an opportunity to deliver on the promises of the SOP. I think we have a strong proposal. I do think that there is value in looking ahead. Okay, and looking ahead. So I'm going to ask Mr. Rivers to go to the next slide. Give you a moment. This is not new to any of the committee members, and this is not new to the board. We've been discussing this, and I think this has been a national conversation, okay? Pam and Jamie, myself, Dr. Gator, and my administration have been discussing this over the last couple of years. Probably was not the optimal decision when we made it, but it's nonetheless something that we do have to respond to, okay? If you take a look at that, both those images, what's important to note here is that the positions you see there, in my opinion, are all essential in many ways to our improvement targets as reflected by the accountability index. This is coming down the pike. Okay, this is coming down the pike. Nationally, locally, for us here, we have to have some heavy conversations next year. Okay? We have to have some heavy conversations next year. I do want to take a moment to go to the next slide, okay, because I think these are all variables that I think informs this process. Not to get chilling, okay, but I think that's well documented. Considerations that informed our process this year. Chief amongst those is keeping our students and our staff at the center. And I think that's reflected with the zero reductions, okay? I think that's also reflected through the program improvements that we're making proposals or requests for. We spent a tremendous amount of time, okay, as I call it, a 360-degree review and fiscal responsibility by rigorously examining historical budgets, okay, and measuring our ask against the foundation of the SIP at each building and the SOP for the district. Stakeholder input, state mandates and trends, bargaining unit considerations, which is our people, and all the things that happens for our kids, to our kids in our academic institution cannot happen without our staff. This notion of in full transparency, I think this has been a conversation topic dating back to last spring, last winter. But I know it probably has not been spoken about publicly, but it's nonetheless something that I think this committee and this board has to be able to discuss. This idea of the MBR, which is the minimum budget requirement, okay? And I left a quick snippet there because all of the things that we were just talking about with that 3.9 and the ask and all the effort that we put into this budget ask, if executed, the MBR can nullify that. I'll give you a quick moment to read that descriptive. Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, but I think it's a sensitive topic that we cannot avoid. So, in my opinion on MBR, and I don't plan on going too deeply into this today. We can certainly have deeper conversations when we get into our workshops. But it's rarely a good thing when you're the only person with a specific designation. Unless you're in an archery competition or something that's a solo activity that's competitive, you don't want to be the only person with a specific designation. And for us here in Stratford, we are the only community who has an exemption financially across the state, okay? I say all that to say that I'm confident we have friends of public education, okay, within our town administration, within our town council. I know we certainly have that here on the board. So I would go on the record and state that I would be shocked, incredibly shocked and disappointed if the MBR exemption was actually executed in this budget. And I say that because of the insidious and destructive capabilities that it has on the public schools. What the MBR says is that we can go below the appropriation on the previous year. What that effectively does is resets the ceiling. It's problematic. And I would guess that attaining that MBR exemption is not with the intention of trimming things by 150 grand or perhaps maybe $500,000. It's problematic, okay? What is potentially even more concerning is its timing. Because if it coincides directly with the fiscal cliff, it can amplify the problem for us here at Stratford. And there is no way to get around it. There's an implication, if it's executed, that plays out through every budget cycle for the next 10 years. Because the ceiling was reset. It ultimately becomes the burden for new board, new town council, becomes a burden for our staff, becomes a burden for our children, becomes a burden for our taxpayers. So I'll say it again. I would be shocked if the MBR is executed this year. Because to me, that sends a clear message about the perspective of public education in our community. We did a regional analysis, and with that 3.9 that we're coming in at, it's lower to the best of my knowledge than any other community in the region. Extremely proud of that, with the work that we put into it, and to do so with zero reductions is something that I think that this board and this administration should be proud of. If we can, Mr. Rivers, against the backdrop of the conversation about the MBR, please go to the next slide. This is a revenue slide, a revenue source slide. Okay, give you a quick moment to maybe take a peek at this. I spoke about the MBR, I spoke about its coinciding with the fiscal cliff. But what's important to note is, every year over the last couple of years, the local portion, the local contribution to our overall operating budget has decreased over time. So it's been happening, okay, by almost 5%, which is, we're still able to make things work. But if the MBR is executed, that bar graph next year would look dramatically different. Okay? So the moving variables, I don't want to say they're speculative variables, but I think to do its due diligence, okay, this board has to be prepared to be responsive to it so we can effectively run the school district. So what's the next level of the work? Mr. Rivers, go to the next slide. With this committee and ultimately with the full board, no conversation around the budget appropriation should happen without kids at the center. No conversation about the budget appropriation or the request should happen without conversation about the people who are supporting our children. Okay? This must be the foundation of which every discussion we have in this space over the next 3.5 months is measured against. It's important that as this committee continues to do their work, we have conversations with stakeholders, okay, and we get their input. It's important that we stay or remain in the space of unpacking the internal tension between a fiscal approach, right, vis-a-vis the MBR or level funding or what have you, and high quality education opportunities for Stratford children. It's important that we make data-driven and equity-driven decisions. And I know for a fact that that is the ethos of this board, because last spring when we were going through this process, I distinctively remember board members saying we're going to leverage an equity approach, and challenged me and my team in many ways, but that has to be something, a variable that reverberates through this process from the start, not in May. Advocacy for the Education Reserve Fund. Okay, if there's ever a time to hedge and mitigate against some of the impact of the fiscal cliff going into next year, this is it. Okay, this is that time. And then lastly, ensuring that all decisions are anchored in our strategic plan and things that move the needle for Stratford children. In preparing this budget, we'll go through our exercises over the next couple of weeks, but transparently, I'm not sure where we can cut. Okay, I'm not sure where we can cut, but I anticipate we'll have some spirited discussions over the next couple of weeks, and ultimately reach consensus, which will be adopted by the board, and then the board will move its budget request to the town. Again, I can't emphasize this piece around the Education Reserve Fund. This is probably more timely this year than in previous years. So we look forward, Mr. Rivers, next slide, to those conversations. These are some of the dates. Okay, today I presented the superintendent's budget. On Wednesday, we'll have a workshop. The successive Wednesday after that, we'll have a workshop, and as well as the successive Wednesday after that on the 22nd. Those workshops are scheduled to be right here on East Broadway. And ultimately, perhaps at the end of the month, the recommendation will go to the board for its final adoption for fiscal year 23-24. Okay? Next slide. We have work to do. Okay? We have work to do. I'm excited about this. I'm excited about the prospects for the Stratford Public Schools. I think that this upcoming school year will be a year that we can measure our improvement. People are working incredibly hard. It's a fiduciary responsibility for this committee and the board to make sure we put the resources into their hands so they can do the work that benefits our children. So with that, I express my appreciation, my gratitude. This is this year's superintendent's proposal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sunday. At this time, it is 7:20, and I would entertain a closing statement, a word of insight, or a very small question, as detailed questions should be emailed to Dr. Sunday and him before Wednesday so that we can come ready to work at our next workshop. Are there any from anyone on the committee? Sure, Scoopy.
You know, I'm excited about the budget actually, but every year, I'm trying to get closer, I get excited that we're finally going to move past keeping the lights on and make meaningful and noticeable change to advance Stratford Public Schools as a district, and I get disappointed, and it really breaks my heart. Because there's so much work that goes into this. As we think about our children, and then we get right back to the way things have always been, you know, because we're not funded. And I don't know how long we can keep doing this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. Anyone else? I'll just take a minute to thank Dr. Sunday and your entire team for what I believe in my time here has been the most powerful, informative budget presentation. The diligence and the respect of keeping our kids centered is far more than what I'm used to, and I thank you very much for that. Seeing zero cuts to our staff, to our programs is inspiring, while finding areas for new initiatives. It keeps me very, very hopeful for all of our children and all of our teammates, like you said earlier, on the front lines. So thank you very much. And I also would like to thank Ms. Corcoran, our chair, who sat in on so many of our contracts and secured them so competitively. That was really the success of being able to use
It was
those
all
budget.
you. Well,
But you were in all of them, so I just wanted to take a minute and thank you for all the time that you invested into that. And I would also like to just close by saying that we've been paying very close attention to our neighbors. And Stratford is pretty good. Stratford is pretty good with where we're projecting this year. So I really hope that our friends in the town and our community is listening, and our parents are hopeful, and our parents are ready to really start being a bigger part of the team of advocacy for all of our kids need in our schools. So thank you again very, very much. If there's no other questions or statements for closing, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Proto, second. Ms. Corcoran, Finance Committee Workshop number 1 is adjourned at 7:24. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for attending.